Okay, so chapter 19 is the first part, or really, it's our second part of the cardiovascular system. So if you have noticed with blood was our first part of cardiovascular system. Then we'll talk about heart with chapter 19, and then the blood vessels will be chapter 20. And so cardiovascular system, because it's so huge and so kind of intense, it is split into 3 chapters, just like something like what you saw with the nervous system. It was split, I think, into 4 chapters. Okay, so we here cardiovascular system is split into 3. So the main function of the cardiovascular system is to make sure that our blood continues to circulate throughout our body. We use this term known as adequate perfusion. So the function of cardiovascular system is to establish adequate perfusion. The word adequate means sufficient, so it is enough. Okay, and perfusion is the word that we use to talk about how well vascularized a tissue is. So how much blood is going through that tissue. And so adequate perfusion is delivering enough blood to a given tissue per given time. So that tissue is, if the tissue has adequate perfusion, it means that enough blood flows through that tissue to keep that tissue healthy and functioning. The composition of the cardiovascular system includes heart, blood vessels, and then blood, right? Heart is going to be our pump, so that's going to be the focus of chapter 19. And then blood vessels are going to be like your pipes that are going to guide or deliver the blood or lead the blood throughout your body. We have 3 main types of blood vessels, and we will discuss them more in detail in chapter 20. But for now, you need to know that we have arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries are going to be the vessels that carry blood away from your heart, and veins carry blood towards your heart. And then capillaries are going to be the sites of the exchange. So only at the capillary level, you're going to see things moving in and out of the blood. In the larger vessels, these are going to be too thick for things to move in and out of them. The important thing is know that arteries carry blood away from the heart. That does not mean that arteries always carry oxygenated blood. Okay, so we will see when we look at the heart, you will see that there are some arteries that are going to be blue, and there are some veins that are going to be red. And we use the blue color to signify the deoxygenated blood, and the red color on the pictures is used to show you the oxygenated blood. And so arteries carry blood away from the heart. There are some arteries that are going to carry deoxygenated blood, and that's going to be specifically seen in your pulmonary circulation. Okay, so arteries away, so AA, and then veins towards the heart. And the only place you see things moving in and out of the blood will be at the capillary level. Okay, so let's look at the heart, and I will, in a little bit, I will use the model of the heart. And now it's kind of weird to show it on here, but this is what the heart would look like. This is larger than in real life. Heart is located in your mediastinum area. So from AMP1, studying those regions, mediastinum is part of your thoracic cavity, and it sits between the lungs. The heart is about the size of a fist. Okay, so your heart is about that size. Heart is a double pump. It is composed of 2 atria and 2 ventricles, and these are separated by either tricuspid or bicuspid valve. These are, the tricuspid is going to be on the right side between the right atrium and right ventricle, and then the bicuspid valve is going to be between the left atrium and left ventricle. So if we were to look at our heart and we open it like this, okay, the orange area right here, that's your left atrium, and then this would be the ventricle, okay, and the white thing is the valve that separates them. So that's that, and then here we have the right side, okay, so atrium and then ventricle. The pointy part of the heart is called the apex, And so the apex, when you open it, when you look at this, the apex is the bottom of the ventricles, okay? So that's the where the ventricles are, and then the atria are here at the top part. That part where all the great vessels are coming out of the heart, that's called the base of the heart. This is a little odd because normally when we say a base of something, it's at the bottom, but here, this is the base where the great vessels are, and this is the apex of the heart. So that's that pointy part. The right side of the heart will receive deoxygenated blood from the systemic circulation. So that blood is going to come into the right atrium, right here. Yeah, right here. I'm seeing myself in the mirror image. So, right atrium receives deoxygenated blood. It is going to receive blood from the superior vena cava, and then from the inferior vena cava, which is here, okay? And if you look at the, and actually I should have made myself a little bigger because you're only seeing me as a little square, I just realized that. But if you look at this image right here, so let me pull that up. Where did it go? Nope. Right here. Okay, so you're looking at the heart right here, and you can see the position of the heart as well here. The right atrium receives the blood from this superior vena cava, which is right here. So I just wrote on it in yellow. It's a little slow to show up. Come on, refresh. For some reason, it's not refreshing for me. Come on. Whoa. Okay, here we go. Okay, so superior vena cava is right here. Oh, come on. Is it? I don't know. Oh, there it is. Okay, so you see that yellow line right there. That's your superior vena cava. And then this here at the bottom, that's your inferior vena cava. Again, I'm not really sure why it is lagging so much, but it will show in a little bit. But basically, yeah, right there, okay, is your inferior vena cava. And so these vessels are going to collect the oxygenated blood from your systemic circulation and lead it into the right atrium. The right atrium also receives deoxygenated blood from the circulation that is the heart's circulation. So all these blood vessels that you see on the surface of the heart, okay, that's your coronary circulation. And so the oxygenated blood that supplies the heart is then going to be collected by a vessel that we call a coronary sinus. That's here at the posterior side of the heart. And that also will lead into the right atrium. So when you look into in the right atrium, hold on, right here, okay, you can see the opening. Hold on, let me stop sharing it so you can see me bigger. So you can see this is your right atrium, this is the superior vena cava right here, and that's the opening of it. And then here we have the inferior vena cava, and then when you lean that, that's the opening of it. And then there's another little thing right here, and that has a little red dot in here. So that shows you that that's also bringing blood into the right atrium, and that's the opening of the coronary sinus. So when we flip that, it's the opening of this big vessel right here, okay? And so 3 vessels bring deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. Something else that you would see in the right atrium is this kind of like an indentation. It's whitish. It doesn't have any red in it because this is not a blood vessel, but it's just kind of like a dimple. And the word that we use for that in science is a fossa. So that is called a fossa ovalis. And fossa ovalis is basically this indentation that is left over. It's a remnant of what used to be an opening. It used to be foramen ovale. And that's where the blood was actually redirected from the right side to the left side of the heart without going into pulmonary circulation during fetal development, because a fetus doesn't use its lungs to do gas exchange, okay? So there was no need to really run a lot of blood through the pulmonary circulation. Okay, so right side is receiving all this blood from these vessels, and it's deoxygenated blood. This blood then passes through a tricuspid valve, and a tricuspid valve on this heart looks something like, remove that. Okay, it looks like this. Okay, so it's this white thing that you see right here. Okay, so that's the valve. If you notice, it goes all the way around, okay? And so it creates like that barrier between the atrium and the ventricle. And it has some strings that are coming off of it, if you see that. It's really weird to position this way. But there's some strings that are attached to that, okay? So the valve itself is that flat part, okay? It's like a membrane. And then it has these strings that are coming off of it, and these strings we call chordae tendineae. And so think about chordae tendineae like cords, strings, and then the valve itself is that membrane. Okay, so the blood will go into the right atrium, it will pass through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. And then from the right ventricle, so let's go and look at our circulatory system here again. From the, I should actually pull up this. This is a little better, okay? So we have from the right ventricle, which is like right here, we're gonna send the blood into this vessel right here. And someone just came. Again, I am not sure why this is lagging so much, but that's not very good. Okay, so from the right ventricle into this vessel where I drew the arrow, the yellow arrow, and that vessel is known as the pulmonary trunk. Pulmonary trunk is an artery because it leads blood away from the heart. It's going from the heart into the vessel away from the heart. So this is an artery, and notice that it's blue. Okay, so remember me saying some arteries are going to carry deoxygenated blood. It's the arteries of the pulmonary circulation. Okay, pulmonary trunk then splits into left and right pulmonary arteries. Those are these blue vessels right here. And these pulmonary arteries are going to send blood into the lungs. And the purpose of the blood going into the lungs through these arteries is so that the blood goes through gas exchange, so that carbon dioxide can be delivered or dumped into the lungs so we can exhale it. And then we are going to pick up oxygen in there. So oxygen will move into the blood, carbon dioxide will move out of the blood, and blood becomes oxygenated. So after the blood gets oxygenated, it is then collected by pulmonary veins. And pulmonary veins are these veins right here. Notice that they are red. Okay, again, pulmonary circulation, arteries and veins are flipped. Arteries are blue, veins are red. And so these pulmonary veins, there are two on each side, are going to lead oxygenated blood into the left atrium. Okay, so let me get rid of my markings here. And this right here is the left atrium. Okay, so where I put that yellow circle, that's the left atrium. Oxygenated blood that comes into the left atrium will then pass through bicuspid valve, and that's this right here that you can kind of see. And we'll have a better picture of the internal features of the heart. And then it goes into the left atrium right here. And from the left atrium, the blood that is now oxygenated will enter the aorta. And this is aorta right here where I drew the arrow. Where I have my arrow, this specifically is your ascending aorta because it comes up out of the heart. And so that's the ascending aorta. Then you have this turn here at the top, that kind of arch. That's the aortic arch. Okay, come on, there it is. And then the aorta turns downwards, okay? And so this right here is going to be your descending aorta. when you're asked to label things, you need to pay attention to where specifically that label is, because I might be asking you, is it ascending aorta, is it descending aorta, or is it aortic arch? So if you see a label at the top of that curve, that's the aortic arch. Okay, and if you see it right as it comes out of the heart, that's ascending aorta. Ascending meaning going up. And then if you see it on the other side after the arch, that's descending aorta. Okay, so pay attention to that. Make a note that, you know, you need to be able to tell me the difference between that. So make a note of that somewhere in your notes, that you do need to pay attention to that. Okay, so then the blood, and there are going to be branches from the aorta. This is a simplified view, but when we get into the blood vessels and identification of blood vessels, you will see that there is actually a little more branching, and you will learn all those blood vessels eventually. Okay, but here this is a simplified version. So the blood from the aorta will eventually split into other vessels and deliver oxygenated blood throughout the body. When we deliver oxygenated blood to the body and to the tissues, the purpose of that is to bring oxygen to those tissues and to collect carbon dioxide, which is produced by cells as a byproduct. Okay, so when this oxygenated blood flows through the tissues, gas exchange happens in reverse. Oxygen goes out of the blood to the tissues, your systemic tissues, or systemic cells, and carbon dioxide is picked up as this blood flows through the tissue. And we will look at capillary exchange, and that will make a little more sense as far as how that goes, but that's part of chapter 20, okay? For now, just know that gas exchange happens by, you know, delivering oxygen to tissues and picking up carbon dioxide. Once that happens, you will then have veins collect this deoxygenated blood, and it will eventually be collected by the superior or inferior vena cava. And then if we're talking about circulation of the heart, it will be the coronary circulation, okay? And all that deoxygenated blood will be returning back into the right atrium. So generally, when we trace the flow of blood through the heart, we start with that right atrium, okay? So you will say, I will have you actually trace the pathway of blood through the heart and through all this on the exam. Okay, somebody is asking, the opening or holes in the heart are called, okay, which ones do you mean? Is it the one like during fetal development? Is that what you mean, Esther? Or do you mean this?
Yeah, the ones in general, the one you're talking about, like, you know, the when you compared it to the when we like the ones in the bone, the foramen, you said something, okay, and then my computer froze, so for a moment I didn't hear it.
Oh, okay. So that's when I was talking about the fossa ovalis. So in the right atrium, we have this. I know I'm minimized, I think, right now, but you have this kind of it looks like a dent in it, and at this point it's called in an adult heart it's called fossa ovalis, but in the fetal development it was called foramen ovalis. So like literally it means oval opening, and this is actually an opening, a hole during fetal development, because a fetus doesn't use the lungs or pulmonary circulation for gas exchange. So during fetal development, we actually take deoxygenated blood, it goes into the right atrium, and then it passes through that opening into the left atrium. We skip the pulmonary circulation during fetal development. And then upon birth, this opening actually closes and then becomes this fossa ovalis. Okay,
got it. Okay, yes, good. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So you will need to trace the blood blood flow through the heart. You will start with the right atrium. That will be your first thing. Number one, you will place that in the right atrium, okay? And I will see who watched this video when I look at that exam and see how many people did not put one in the right atrium, okay? Put one in the right atrium, that's your starting point. And it actually says that in the question, you know, right atrium being your starting point. You would then go through tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Then the blood will go into the pulmonary trunk. And you know what? I just realized that I forgot to tell you the other set of valves. We do have other set of valves there, and those are seen right here. Okay, and that's called a pulmonary semilunar valve because it's at the base of the pulmonary trunk. So blood will go through pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk, then pulmonary arteries, then in the lungs, it will go through gas exchange and become oxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood will be collected by the pulmonary veins. Pulmonary veins will take this oxygenated blood into the left atrium. From the left atrium, blood will move through bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Left ventricle will send the blood through the aortic semilunar valve, which would be like right here behind that pulmonary trunk, because they kind of lay on top of each other there. But it will go through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta, into the ascending aorta, then aortic arch, and then descending aorta, and then systemic tissues. And then from systemic tissues, ultimately blood will be collected by veins, and then the largest veins are superior and inferior vena cava, and coronary sinus would be there with it as well. Okay. So that would be, so you can see that this is, when we said it's a double pump, okay, it means that it has two sides and it's associated with two circuits. One circuit is the pulmonary circulation, that's between the heart and your lungs, and the other circuit is your systemic circulation, and that's between the heart and the systemic cells, okay? So that's kind of the nutshell of the blood flow here. I've mentioned those valves here. Actually, I want to take a closer look at those valves, and we can actually use, actually, I don't want to use this one. Let's use this one. So this image, as soon as it shows up, is going to show you the internal features of the heart. And this is figure 19.8, I believe, or it used to be at one point. I'm not sure what it is now, but no, actually, I think this is, yeah, this is from the 3rd edition. So it should be figure 19.8 in your textbook, and shows you the internal features of the heart here, as well as the great vessels that are associated with the heart. So this is a very useful image, and make sure that you spend some time labeling this for you. You have those blank labeling or pictures for labeling that I uploaded for you in the Google Drive. Hopefully you're able to access that. If not, let me know. You know, just practice labeling this, add labels, and then check yourself. Okay, that's important too. When you're labeling something, don't just write stuff on it and then let it be. Okay, make sure that you double check with the textbook and see if you place those labels correctly. So one part of your exercise, your lab exercise, you have a blank heart there, and I'm asking you to label pretty much everything that's on this picture on that blank diagram. And you will have to draw in some things. And so use this image to do that. Don't just do it out of your head. You have your textbook with you. And so I need you to reference to that textbook and make sure that you're placing the labels in the correct space, in the correct, you know, associated with the correct thing. You don't have to label coronary circulation on that, just FYI, okay? Which I believe that says that in the exercise. But here we can see the cross section of the heart, and we see those chambers there. One thing, notice that the left atrium kind of looks like it's smaller, but what I want to point out is that the heart is, the chambers are kind of at an angle to each other. So it's not like you have two atria next to each other and then the two ventricles next to each other all in the single plane, you know, but it's like if you had them next to each other like this, and then you grab the heart and then you kind of twisted it, that's how the chambers are. And when I say chambers, because sometimes this is confusing to students, when I say chambers, I mean those spaces in the heart. So a chamber is an atrium or a ventricle, okay? So when I say label the chambers on the heart, you would need to make 4 labels. left atrium, left ventricle, right ventricle, okay? Chambers is just a collective word that we use for those spaces, for those areas, okay? So we have our right atrium is right here. And you can see this would be like the opening of the superior vena cava. Here is the opening of the inferior vena cava. And then this is the opening of the coronary sinus. Coronary sinus opening is going to be smaller than fossa ovalis. That's kind of how you can tell the difference between the two, okay? It's a little difficult to say, to tell on this, that one is actually just an indent and the other one is an opening, okay? And then this oval thing, that's your fossa ovalis. Again, waiting for it to appear. And where is it? Let me see. I wonder if I can do my sharing a little differently. Oh, nope, this doesn't work for some reason. Okay, I thought maybe I could share like just my iPad screen and that would be faster, but that did not work. Okay, so anyway, we have that right atrium right there. Then this is the valve. So here you can see the valve really well, okay? Valve is this part right here. Okay, it's that white kind of a membrane-like looking thing, okay? And it will line that opening between the right atrium and right ventricle, okay? That's what separates atrium from ventricles. Then you can see those strings that are attached to the valve, okay? So right here, might be blue. Again, it's lagging. Not sure why, but it should appear here in a moment. But you see those strings that are coming off of the valve. Those are called chordae tendineae. Again, chordae for cords. So remember, that should help you kind of remember that's chordae tendineae. I think somewhere it might also call them tendinous cords or something like that. Okay, that's it just appeared. Okay, so you have those blue lines, those are chordae tendineae or tendinous cords, same thing. And these cords are attached to like little finger-like structures projecting from the wall of the ventricle. Okay, so those are, let me see if I can get a good color. So like right here, and right here. Again, we have to wait for it to refresh a little bit, but those are called papillary muscles. So those finger-like structures, and you see three major ones right there, so I outlined them in green. Those are your papillary muscles. And one reason why tricuspid valve is called tricuspid is because you generally have three major papillary muscles on the right side, and left side it's called bicuspid valve, and that's because you see just the two major papillary muscles in general. Okay, sometimes it's not as obvious, but in general this is how it is. And so that's where those names come from. So if you forget and you see this image, you can see on the right side you got three, so that's the tri one, and on the left side you got two, so that's the bi one. Okay, for two. So that's our valve. Just make sure that you're labeling valve as a valve, cords as the cords, and papillary muscles as papillary muscles. Sometimes I have students, they see that the label is going to the string that's on the right side, and they'll be like, oh, that's tricuspid valve. Well, no, the string is your chordae tendineae on the right side. So don't be labeling that as a valve. Okay, so again, on this picture that you see here, the yellow outline is the valve itself. And then the blue lines that I drew on are your chordae tendineae or tendinous cords. And then the green little hill-like looking things, those are your papillary muscles, okay? I emphasize that because I do see students making a mistake with this often. So I want you to not make those mistakes, all right? So that's that. Then we have this pulmonary valve, pulmonary semilunar valve here, and that's right here. Again, I have to wait for it to show up because of this lag, but you can see it, you can see the label on the image and see what it points to. It's this right here, right? And the semilunar valves are composed of 3 pouches. On our picture, we just see 2 because you have a cross section of that. So one of those pouches would be, you know, dissected. It's on the other half of the heart that we're not seeing. And these valves are attached at the vessel wall. But in the middle, where it looks like they're touching like this, they're not attached there in the middle to each other. They're just kind of leaning or resting against each other, okay? And so when the, I'm gonna stop this, but when the ventricle contracts and it pushes blood or squeezes the blood will start pushing on the bottom of that semilunar valve. And as these pouches are resting next to each other and blood is coming upwards, they will be pushed apart and blood goes into the pulmonary trunk, okay? When the ventricle begins to relax, it stops contracting. The blood that's left behind in the pulmonary trunk now is not being pushed up because ventricle relaxed, right? And so some of that blood starts falling back towards the ventricle. As it does that, it flows along the walls of the pulmonary trunk and it fills those pouches up. And as those pouches get filled with blood falling back towards the ventricle, they will fill up and they'll rest against each other again, okay? So that's kind of how they work. I know my hands are not really showing that all that great, but if you look on, I believe Visible Body probably has a little animation, and that should help out with kind of visualizing how the pulmonary or aortic semilunar valve really work, because they work the same way. That's your semilunar valve. The aortic and semilunar, again, they work the same way. And then we see the pulmonary trunk splits into the pulmonary arteries, left and right pulmonary arteries. And oops, I'm drawing on this, but I forgot to share this. Where are we? Share screen. What? Let me see if this will work. I'm trying to see. No, that's not gonna work. I'll have to figure this out later. It worked before. Whoa, what did I just do? Okay. But anyway, so you have those pulmonary arteries right here. And then pulmonary arteries would go through the lungs, which we don't see here. And then blood will return through the pulmonary veins right here. Those are the red ones. And goes into the left atrium. And left atrium, I'll do in yellow. Okay, and then similar things happen on the left side. Now, when we're describing the flow of blood through the heart, I want you to realize that, okay, that yellow thing is the left atrium, okay, and then you have that bicuspid valve. The atria are going to contract at the same time and ventricles are going to contract at the same time. So it's not like right atrium, right ventricle, and then left atrium and left ventricle. No, the atria contract at the same time and then ventricles contract at the same time, or very close to the same time, okay, if we are trying to be very accurate, okay? What just happened here? Okay. So that's that. Too many windows open here. Something else that I want to point out on this image here is that the wall between the two ventricles is the interventricular septum. So that's this. Septum is something that divides an area, okay? It's like a partition, okay? So interventricular septum means that it's between the ventricles. Okay, why is this doing this? Okay. So that's interventricular septum. There's also interatrial septum. It is not really well visible here because we actually don't see where the atria are leaning against each other, and that's so that we can see the vessels here, the pulmonary trunk and the aorta behind it. So you don't see it there, but there is interatrial septum as well. And it's actually, well, it's this wall right here. But you don't see that, like behind that is the left atrium, okay? So this left atrium that you see here goes behind these vessels, kind of there, because remember, everything is kind of at an angle. So that's probably it, like major parts of the heart here. Let's see, what do we have next? Notice that the ventricles look like they're different sizes, but again, the size difference that you see, that you might think that you see, is due to the way that this cut is done. Remember, these are at an angle. And so even though the right side technically kind of looks like it's larger than the left side, it really is not. So the volume of the blood that is pumped by both ventricles is the same or equal. That's in a normal, healthy heart. Now, if the heart is not normal and healthy, and one ventricle is not as strong as the other, and it's not able to remove all the blood that needs to be removed out, we can observe an edema. And so if you have a left ventricle that is not able to keep up with all the blood that it receives, and so what that means is that it contracts, but some of the blood is left behind because it's weaker for some reason. This will create a backup in the left atrium, that will create a backup in your left pulmonary veins, and that will eventually create a backup in the pulmonary capillaries. Well, this backup of blood causes excess of pressure. There's increased pressure in there. So what that means is you're going to see more fluid leaking out of capillaries. This will make a little more sense when we talk about capillary exchange again, because the pressure within the capillary determines the amount of stuff getting out of the blood and then returning back into the blood. If you increase that pressure in the capillaries, you're going to see more fluid leaking out. And so if you have a backup in the pulmonary capillaries, that means there is going to be excess fluid leaking out of the pulmonary capillaries, which means there's fluid accumulation in the lungs, and that would be impairing your breathing, okay? And that we call that pulmonary edema, okay? So you have this excess fluid in your lungs, and yeah, so it would impair your breathing. If the opposite is true, so if the right ventricle is not able to pull or pump all the blood out from the right side, that would create a backup in your systemic capillaries. And this can represent itself or present itself as accumulation of fluid in your systemic tissues. Generally, you'd see that in legs or hands as swelling because you have excess fluid there. So systemic edema could be a result of your right ventricle not pumping as strongly as it should. There are other reasons why you could have systemic or pulmonary edema as well, but this is one of them. So that is the edema. Now, we've already said where the heart is located, so that's mediastinum as far as area. One other thing that you see on this image is this sac that encloses the heart. This, again, should not be very new because you covered this in like the very first part of your A&P1 when you talked about like the membranes and regions and all that. And so, and I'm doing that with my A&P1 people. So I know that you've done this in A&P1. So the sac that encloses the heart and kind of helps holding it in place is known as the pericardium. And pericardium is, so what you learned about in A&P1 as far as pericardium is you just looked at the serous pericardium. And serous pericardium is a double layer of serous membrane that encloses the heart. You have the visceral layer of serous pericardium, and that's also known as the epicardium. And then you have the parietal layer of serous pericardium, which is the one that's separated from the visceral by a pericardial cavity, okay? So when we look, I think I have a little closer look at that somewhere, right here, okay? So when you look at this image right here, in that rectangle up there, you see how the serous pericardium is kind of a folded double layer of membrane. And then between those is the pericardial cavity. Okay, again, the visceral layer or the epicardium is going to be the outermost layer of the heart. Okay, parietal layer of the serous pericardium, it is not part of the heart wall. Okay, it's part of the pericardial sac, but it's not part of the heart wall. And then something that you did not probably see in A&P1 is the fibrous layer of the pericardium. And fibrous layer of pericardium is on top of the parietal layer of serous pericardium. It's a tough fibrous tissue. And this is attached to the great vessels. It's attached at the bottom to the diaphragm, as you can see on here. And that helps keep the heart in place, okay? The serous pericardium, the cells that make up that serous pericardium produce serous fluid that fills that the pericardial cavity. And so when the heart beats and contracts, you don't feel it contracting, okay? It reduces friction and you're not really aware of the heart, you know, doing what it's doing, right? You're not aware of it beating. So it reduces that friction. Things that you need to keep in mind as this goes. I'm gonna go back into, actually, let me stay on this for a little bit. We're gonna be talking about heart wall here in a moment. That will be on that picture that I had right before this. The layers of the heart wall, there are 3 layers of heart wall. Okay, you have going from inside out, and we can use that rectangle, so I'm gonna draw on that. You will have endocardium, which is the innermost layer of the heart. So right there where my yellow line is. Then the thickest part of the heart wall will be myocardium. Oh, that's not a good color. Okay, that's this green stuff. Okay, hold on, it will show up. Okay, so the thickest part of the heart wall is myocardium, and that's cardiac muscle. Okay, right there. And then the last part, the outermost part of the heart wall is the epicardium, or the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. And I chose blue for that one, which will show up here in just a moment. Okay, so 3 layers of the heart wall. These are parts of the heart wall. Now, when we look at pericardium, pericardium also has 3 parts, but not all 3 parts of the pericardium are parts of the heart wall, okay? So pericardium has the visceral layer of pericardium, which is also part of heart wall. And then we have the parietal layer of the pericardium and the fibrous pericardium, and these are known as the pericardial sac, okay? So make sure that you keep that straight somehow. Go back, let me go back to this, okay? So right here, and in the lab exercise, I am asking you to draw parts of the heart wall and the pericardium. So what you will do in your lab exercise, again, this will tell me who watched this and who didn't. In your lab exercise, you will basically copy this. That's the heart wall. Those are the layers of the heart wall. But this doesn't include complete pericardium. This only has the visceral layer of the pericardium. So what you will have to do for the lab exercise is, like right here, you will draw this. And you don't have to use these colors. I'm just using something. And something like this. Okay, so just 2 more layers need to be there that are separated by a cavity there. And you will label this space as pericardial cavity. Cavity, okay. The blue thing right here will be your parietal layer of serous pericardium. And this will be the fibrous. Okay, I didn't leave myself enough space, but that is your fibrous pericardium. Okay, so for that part of the lab exercise, don't just draw the heart wall. Draw the heart wall, your pericardial cavity, and then the rest of the pericardium, okay? The kind of to point out, okay, this and this, this is known as the pericardial sac, okay? And then these 3 layers together are heart wall. Okay, so the visceral layer of the serous pericardium is part of pericardium, but it's also part of the heart wall, but it is not part of the pericardial sac. I hope that makes sense. Okay. So that's our pericardium. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about is the coronary circulation, and then we will dismiss, okay? For the coronary circulation, and if you have downloaded the notes, that's a good place to look for this information here. So you have those old notes of mine, so use them, okay? And this is where it's going to summarize those vessels for you again. But let's go and look at where do I see here? Okay, so coronary circulation. So coronary circulation refers to the vessels that are found on the surface of the heart. These are the vessels that supply the heart, that keep the heart alive, because the blood, all that blood that goes through the heart, through the inside, through those chambers, that is not given oxygen to the muscle cells and to all the cells that make up the heart. That just passes through. Heart itself needs to have vessels that keep it alive. Okay, so let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit because we don't really need the cadaver there, but okay, so let's go with this. So if you look at me for just a moment, okay, and this heart, you can see that there are some vessels here. If you were to pick one of these vessels and peel it off, what would happen is you would notice that there is this groove left behind. And so these grooves of within the heart that house these vessels, we call these grooves sulci. Sulcus is 1, 2 or more sulci. Okay, so sulcus, spelled like that, and the plural would be sulci, like this. Okay. So when you hear sulcus, think about that's the groove where the blood vessels are, the major blood vessels are. And so we have 3 main sulci that we'll be talking about. We have a coronary sulcus, then we have anterior interventricular sulcus, and then posterior interventricular sulcus. Okay. So let's start with the coronary sulcus. Coronary sulcus is the sulcus that runs along the kind of the circumference of the heart. It goes along like this. So it's this groove right here, and then goes, sorry, it kind of keeps opening, but it goes this way, okay? That's your coronary sulcus. goes around the heart that way. The coronary sulcus will house the left and right coronary arteries. It also will house the circumflex artery, which is a pretty quick branch off of the left coronary artery here. Let me see how we see this on this right here. The left and right coronary arteries are branching, they're direct branches of aorta. Okay, so we can't really see that here because the auricles are kind of in our way, and auricles are just the outside extensions of the atria. But this is your right coronary artery right here. Okay, and then it would go kind of towards the back, and then we'll branch out. It has some branches there, but it begins like it branches from the aorta. We just can't see that because that auricle is covering that. The left coronary artery is a little different. It's shorter. It branches from like right here. Again, we don't really see it. Come on, markings, show up. I'm waiting for that to show up, but the dotted line, that's your left coronary artery. That's where it is. And then the left coronary artery splits pretty quickly into anterior interventricular artery, which is this one on the anterior side. And then the circumflex, which the circumflex artery, that should kind of be a hint that it goes around the circumference of the heart. So circumflex is, well, that's not a good color. Circumflex would be right here. Okay, so that left coronary artery splits into the anterior interventricular artery, which runs along the anterior side, and then the circumflex, which would go, you know, to the left in the coronary sinus. So that's what we see in the, oh, and then the vein that goes with the coronary sulcus is our coronary sinus. Okay, so the main vein that you see in the coronary sulcus is the coronary sinus, and it's best viewed on the posterior side of the heart. Okay, so the arteries that you see in the coronary sulcus, again, are left coronary artery, right coronary artery, circumflex artery, so 3 arteries, and then the coronary sinus for the vein. Okay, so those are in the coronary sinus. Coronary sulcus, darn it. And yeah, so that's that. The other sulci that we need to mention are anterior interventricular sulcus and posterior interventricular sulcus. So let's take the anterior interventricular sulcus, since we kind of already mentioned it, then because it's branch of that left coronary artery there. So anterior interventricular sulcus is the groove on the anterior side of the heart, and it's called interventricular because it runs on top of the interventricular septum. Okay, interventricular means it's between the ventricles. So it runs along the top side of the interventricular septum. That's why it's called anterior interventricular sulcus. It is going to house your anterior interventricular artery. So arteries are easy to remember that go with the sulci because they have the same name as the sulcus. Even with the coronary sulcus, except for the circumflex one, you could still, you know, the left and right coronary arteries are in coronary sulcus, right? So anterior interventricular sulcus has anterior interventricular artery. It also houses part of the great cardiac vein. So the vein that goes along with it. So if you're looking at the model, the main vein that runs along with the anterior interventricular sulcus is the great cardiac vein. It is not labeled on our picture for some reason, but that's the vein. That's the name of that vein next to it. The anterior interventricular artery is also known as the widowmaker because this one supplies the anterior sides of the ventricles as well as the interventricular septum. And so that means it brings blood to those parts. So if this vein, if this artery gets occluded, it causes, it's the most common cause for fatal heart attacks. Okay, so it's very important artery for our heart. It comes from the left coronary artery. So anterior interventricular artery is a branch of the left coronary artery. Another branch of the left coronary artery is the circumflex artery, as we've already said. And that's that for the anterior interventricular sulcus. The posterior interventricular sulcus would be on the posterior side of the heart, thus the name. And this one is going to have posterior interventricular artery and the middle cardiac vein. So the vein that runs along the posterior interventricular artery is the middle cardiac vein. The artery, this artery is going to supply the posterior sides of the ventricles, and it is a branch of the right coronary artery. Another branch of the right coronary artery is the marginal artery. Okay. So the arteries and veins that I have mentioned, those are the ones that you need to know. There are some other ones that you might see, but they're not labeled. Just know these for the coronary circulation. Okay. So left and right coronary artery, you need to know. Then you need to know circumflex artery. You need to know marginal artery, anterior interventricular artery, posterior interventricular artery for arteries, these and where they are. For the veins, you need coronary sinus, you need great cardiac vein, and you need middle cardiac vein. Okay, I believe that's it for the coronary circulation. Okay, so you'll have more arteries than veins, and that's that. So I'm gonna go ahead and just finish with the coronary circulation. That's where we will stop, and then the rest is going to be recorded. I have it in 2 recordings, and I'll post this as soon as it processes. It will go up. I'll go ahead and convert that into YouTube video because somebody said that they had issues opening the few ones that were actually posted on the Blackboard. So it will become a YouTube video, and the other ones are already there. So it's about the myocardium and then features of the myocardium, and then the last part would be the cardiac cycle. So make sure that you watch that by Wednesday. Okay, we had this today. You can watch the other 2 tomorrow together. They're about an hour. So it's about 20 something or 30 minutes for each. So it's not more than an hour, but make sure that you're watching these kind of regularly. And then we will start talking about blood vessels on Wednesday. And you need to start looking at the blood vessels already, okay? So I'm gonna put this heart right here. So in your textbook, if you go to chapter 20, okay, I know we just started talking about 19, but if you go to chapter 20, the second half of that chapter, let me find where that is, starting with section with section 20.8, really. This is where the identification of blood vessels begins. So this is where you will pull up that blank PowerPoint with the blank pictures, and you label those pictures over and over and over. Begin now. You cannot cram all of these vessels. It's like learning muscles or bones. You cannot do that in a day or 2, okay? So start, take it 1 figure a day and just be like, okay, today I'm going to get down the arteries in the, the major arteries on figure 20.19, okay? And get those down. And then as you get into like smaller sections, like you get into arm or just a leg, you'll see that from that main guy, okay, there will be some things that repeat, but start learning them now. If you remember your muscles or bones, some of that stuff might be helpful to identify the vessels. And so Do not leave this for the end. Okay, start early. This is an intense chapter, so begin early.